Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Wednesday, the 7th of August, comes to you from London. And the dollar index fairly flat over the last 24 hours, so not much change there, although markets have steadied with the China-US sort of trade war showdown. We are seeing the euro fairly flat as well. It rose against the dollar on that dollar fallback, but actually now just fairly flat, so waiting for the next move. And the place to look really for the next move is against the yens, where the dollar tends to give us a heads up. Dollar has fallen quite significantly against the yen, trying to just build some support here, but still bearish on all three time frames. We've now got a situation on the 60-minute point and figure chart where we'll either break to the upside and activate the upside target, or break to the downside, activating a bigger downside target. So that's the picture to watch at the moment. Sterling sitting at 121.76, seems to be happy around this 121 area at the moment, and the sterling against the euro at 108.72, similarly just fairly static, having had the big moves over the last week or so. Still looking very bearish, of course, and the downside targets are activated. The upside target is not activated. Looking against the Swiss franc, we're sitting at 118.84. So still lower there as well. And against the Aussie dollar, sterling has actually strengthened quite significantly. Bitcoin is sitting at $11,600, so pulled back below that $12,000 level, but still bullish on all three time frames. We've got a new upside target now on the short-term chart of 440, so 12,440. That's 7% higher. We need to move above the 11,700 level to activate that, so keep an eye out for that. US stock markets recovered a little bit last night, up about 1.3%. So we unwound just under half of that fall the day before, that 3% fall. So we are now seeing a sort of bounce point, and maybe the markets are just finding support on the daily cloud at the moment. So just keep an eye on that. Of course, if we move below the low that we set earlier this week, that would be bearish to the market. We've got an upside target on the S&P of 1.7% higher. That's 2,930 roughly. Looking at the Nasdaq, similar recovery here, a 3% upside target that's been activated, and again we might just well be finding support on the cloud here. The Dow was up 1.2%, and again it's bouncing on the cloud as well. So all the markets in the US seem to be looking at this cloud support, excluding the Russell 2000, which is clearly through, and we have seen the second line stocks in the US really not performing anywhere near as well as the major indices, so we are seeing a fall away there. The S&P futures down slightly this morning, down 0.2%, and the Nasdaq E-mini is down by a similar amount, so it'll be interesting to see how the US opens, but it does look like it will open slightly down based on those futures. The UK market this morning hasn't really rebounded, and we're seeing that the FTSE 100 index is in that bearish territory below the cloud. Bearish on the long term, bearish on the medium term, and clearly bearish on the short term. Just a shortage of downside targets here, looking at all the point and figure charts, so that does make it quite hard to call the market at the moment. The FTSE mid-caps, we do have a downside target here, 3%, 6%, and 9%, that one not activated, and again we're in quite clearly bearish territory, so UK stocks are looking a lot worse on the charts than the US market. As are German stocks, we see here the DAX is bearish below the cloud on all three time frames, 3% downside on the short-term chart, only 1% on the medium term, and we are still effectively in an uptrend on the 1% point and figure chart. But the markets have rolled over, and the failure to break last year's high has been a feature. The CAC Courant has actually tried much harder to break resistance this year, but has really struggled again at that level and fallen back through the cloud on the daily chart. A shortage of downside targets for the French market, but it is still looking pretty bearish. In Asia, we saw the Japanese market was flat. It was just up very, very slightly, and again is still bearish on all three time frames here. The Hang Seng was down slightly, and again bearish on all three time frames, and the Shanghai index was down 0.3%. And again, that's bearish on all three time frames. India remains the stronger market. It held it bucked the trend again, but it's still in a downtrend on the short and medium term charts. We have some new downside targets emerging, lots of upside targets on the medium and long term charts, so that's still quite interesting for the Indian market, but short term we have seen that fall away. In Sydney, we had a real fall away this week, but we are finding support again on the cloud, like we've seen on the US market. So the Sydney market is actually looking a lot better. Brent crude is weaker this morning. We're sitting at 58.66, so we're bearish in the short term. We've got downside targets around this area and lower. We've got some 3% lower on the 60-minute chart, and we are seeing targets to 54 and 53 on the longer term charts. And we know this is the weaker time of year for crude oil, so it is looking more bearish this week. And WTI sitting at $53. We've got downside targets to 46.78 and 47.50 on the long-term charts. A move below $50 would be psychologically quite key for US nat gas. For WTI. US nat gas sitting lower at $2.09. It's only a matter of time really before we break that $2 mark, and that's what traders are looking for now. 183 is the long-term target. 192 is the medium-term target. Gold, of course, has bucked the trend and looks amazing on the charts. We've got good upside targets for gold, still at 2.7%, 3%, and on the long-term chart, we've still got some very good upside targets. Silver also now clearly bullish into bullish territory on the long-term chart, so we are seeing precious metals really recovering quite substantially. US 10-year yield sitting at 1.68%, so we're now firmly in the 160s. Really hard to believe that yields have virtually halved over the last year, and no one would have believed that when we were sitting at 3.2%, but that's where we are, and it's looking the outlook for yields now into the 150s, so we are seeing that as quite a feature. German bond yields negative now, of course, and we are seeing the bond market just continuing to edge higher all the time. Really quite incredible that we've seen German bond price going from 157 right through to 176, so in less than a year we've really rocketed there in the bond market. Taking a look now at the individual stocks, we see that the world indices picture was fairly mixed. Most of the US markets were up quite strongly, and Europe, we've seen this morning, is flat to middling. Asia didn't really react because of that time difference. Looking at the Dow 30, the best performers in the Dow last night were Nike. They're up 3%, and if we look at the chart on Nike, we see that it is breaking down, and it's quite interesting that we are seeing a lot of these charts now breaking into bearish territory on the medium-term chart, remembering that the indices on the daily chart are actually sitting above medium-term territory. We are seeing that happening there. Walgreens Boots, they were down 0.8%. That chart looks absolutely terrible. They've underperformed the Dow by 32% this year, so not a great picture there. Looking at the Nasdaq, we start with the Take-Two Interactive. They were up by 8%. That chart looking actually pretty good. Long term holding on to its gains, so that's quite good there. And on the downside, we had Mylan Group. They were down nearly 6%. So that chart again looking pretty weak. Taking a look at the Aussie market, we've got Resolute Mining Limited. They're up 8%, so that's looking pretty good. Shortage of upside targets. They have outperformed the index there by 60% on the Dow, so that's really quite impressive this year. And on the downside, we had Fortescue Metals. They were down 3%, so they're seeing a break of that support level there that was running up the hill quite sharply. We've broken below the cloud, and we see the relative breaking, so that run looks set to be over. Now looking at India, we saw Zee Entertainment. They're up 7%, but the chart still looks very bearish, with moves right below the cloud here. And then if we look at the upside, the downside, we had India Bulls House, and they were down nearly 9%, and that chart again looking terrible. So there are still quite a lot of charts around that don't look great, and that's one of the keys in this market. Looking to Europe now, first of all, we start with the UK market. Fresno, they're up 1.5%, but the chart is in a clear downtrend. Intercontinental Group hotels recovering after their few days of falls and results, but they are looking still pretty bullish. Here we see the live pricing coming in from Yahoo Finance. And if we look at the downside, we've got Spirax Sarco Engineering down 4%, Standard Life Aberdeen, they're down 4% as well. That long-term picture not looking great there. Really hard to find good-looking charts. Glencore are out results this morning. They're down 3%. And again, the chart's not looking great here either. We've underperformed the market by 25% this year so far versus the Dow Jones. Now looking at the 250 stocks in the UK, we've got the best performer, Ultra Electronics. They're up 5% this morning, looking pretty good there. And the Rank Group, they're up nearly 4%, but the chart not looking that good. And if we look at the downside, we've got Cyrus Minerals, they're down 5%, and James Fisher and Sons down 3%. Again, the chart's just starting to break down. We're seeing that as a feature here. Funding Circle, their woes continue. Their chart just hitting new lows this morning, underperforming the market by 70% so far this year. As are Aston Martin, they're down a further 2% this morning. That chart looking pretty terrible as well. Taking a look now at the European market, we start with Bayer in Germany. They're up 2.3%, but the chart's still pretty bearish. Underperformed the market this year by 15% versus the Dow Jones. We have got a lot of stocks up this morning in Europe. Looking at the downside, we have KLM, they're down by 1.3%, Nokia down by 0.7%. So we are still seeing a lot of stocks still in this bearish territory. Watch out for the US opening today. That's going to be key. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.